It's 1972, Marlon Brando, Bernardo Bertolucci, and Francis Bacon. What's the connection, you say? Basically, Bernardo Bertolucci took Marlon Brando to this exhibition of Francis Bacon to show him what was the mood he wanted for the movie Ultimo Tango in Paris, which is like probably the most controversial movie in the history of cinema. Released in 1972, it's a movie that has sparked controversy since the day it was released. It was seized by the Italian government in 1974, and it was not possible to see the movie in Italy until 1986. Basically, it was a banned movie, and so his status became legendary very soon because of this strong sexual content, and also because of its erotical and decadent romanticism. It's the story of Marlon Brando, who just is a widower, American in Paris, and he meets this girl younger than him, and they start this really weird sexual relationship in an abandoned apartment where they meet, they have sex, and no one knows nothing about the other. And yeah, basically the movie became this really powerful icon because of this content, which is very debatable on many levels. Like, what's the meaning of the movie already? Like the fact that Bernardo Bertolucci, the director, decided to bring Marlon Brando to see the Francis Bacon paintings is because he wanted to show him the metaphysical aspects of pain that he wanted to portray in the movie. So this is exactly what Ultimo Tango is all about for me. Like a sort of like looking back into the history, like a time machine, and like looking for like ambiguous and mysterious pieces of culture, pieces of art, seeking for beauty. And I mean, of course, many of you guys will say like this is a form of nostalgia, and of course it is, but I think we need to start dialoguing again with our past in order to rethink of a new future. tango to samba. What's the connection here? Basically, during the 20th century, one of the things that like sparked more discussions were different vision of future, and who could ever use the most popular Brazilian song as the theme for a dystopic movie? Only Terry Gilliam, like genius director from the Monty Python Collective. He created this sort of alternative dystopia vision of the future in the 80s, where basically it's the story of this bourgeois, you know, like the typical white collar that lives completely oppressed by the system, by this very bureaucratical and illogical system. And so the meaning of all this, like the meaning of dystopia, is like, it's not really a bad future, but it's just like a present where that never changes, like an endless present where every day is like the previous one. It's like a Groundhog Day, basically. And so the two most important visions of dystopy during the 20th century were 1984 by George Orwell and Brave New World by Huxley. So what's the difference between them? Like Huxley was Orwell, who was like probably is the most popular dystopia ever, 1984. Like he thought about a future where the government was really oppressive and they wanted to cancel information and control people through fear. So it was a really he conceptualized power as a hard thing, so something that as a physical manifestation. On the contrary, Huxley, he realized that the future, the war, was not for the control of the bodies, but it was for the control of the minds. So he says, I'm not really scared about people wanting to cancel information. I'm more scared about people like giving us so much information that you make information useless, basically. So information becomes unreliable, becomes something, you know, like futile, you know, like it's futility. And basically, this is what I think we are locked in nowadays. Like this is like our contemporary experience. So the paradox here is taking something like as the theme of the most famous Brazilian song ever, you know, and which is like the symbol of escapism, you know. This is what we're seeking now, an escape from reality. So this is what Terry Gilliam did. He took something that symbolized an escape from reality, the exotic Brazil, you know, the place where the sun is always shining, and he created this sort of like vision of its protagonist, where like he's trying to escape from this existence of nonsense. always been imagined as some dark, bleak place. And this is a perfect example of it. This is Raymond Scott, one of the most beloved pioneers of electronic music. Already in the late 50s, early 60s, he started building his own instruments, and he used electronic music to support, for commercial use mainly, and also use them for movies. Like the most famous example is the cartoons from Warner Brothers, all the Acme sounds from Willy the Coyote, that's Raymond Scott also. So let's say that in the 60s, lots of people believed that the future would have been amazing. Lots of people believed that, that's the space age, like an era of optimism and naivety, where people believed that maybe in a decade or two, they would have been able to play golf on the moon, or go and take a cocktail on Venus, whatever, this is the space age sci-fi. And also this was reflected in the design of the age, like the famous space age design, where everything was curved and round and made of plastic, this new material, which was revolutionary and seems miraculous. So it was really, the 60s was really an age of a different vision of the future, a different type of sci-fi, and in general, a different type of lifestyle also. So what happened? What happened? Why this has changed? So you can already hear the major difference between the previous song, which was from 1962, Portofino by Raymond Scott, and this one, which is called Produzione by Zalla from 1973. Like, Zalla is actually Piero Umiliani, who is like probably one of the most important Italian composers of soundtracks of all times, together with Ennio Morricone and Piero Piccioni. And he was famous for these very light-hearted themes for like Italian comedies during the 60s. Like, one of the most famous is like Mana Mana, you know, Mana Mana. I mean, I think you know it. So what happened? Why a guy like that would start doing music like this, which is really experimental? I mean, it sounds like Jeff Mills, but it's 1973, okay? It's like futuristic, percussive, tribalistic techno. And basically what happened is, like, in the 70s, the world changed radically. There was like a huge energetic crisis in 1973 that stopped the economical growth, global economical growth, and sparked a completely new climate of disillusionment. You know, after the 68, you know, like the cultural revolution, you know, the civil rights revolution, you know, this new generation in the mid 70s started losing hope on their fate to be able to reshape the world. So music changed radically, and Umiliani understood before many others that the future will be a very different place, and the music will be as different.
Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. See the breaking glass in the underpass. See the breaking glass in the underpass. Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. Hear the crushing steel, feel the steering wheel. Hear the crushing steel, feel the steering wheel. Warm, leatherette. 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 Warm leatherette melts on your burning flesh. You can see your reflection in the luminescent dash. Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. A tear of petrol is in your eye. The handbrake penetrates your thigh. Quick, let's make love before you die. On warm, leatherette. On warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette. Warm, Join the car crash set.
Whoa. That was the normal Warm Leatherette 1978. So another jump in time. What happened? Like, this is probably one of the most iconic and like industrial track ever. Like, it's a sort of like, I would say it's a anticipatory track of what we will hear in the 80s. He was a precursor with this track, Daniel Miller, and he's the founder of Mute Record also, which is like the most important industrial label in the history. Like, he would release later Depeche Mode and other really important artists. But what I wanted to focus here is the fact that, as I was telling you before, like, Umiliani in 73 already realized that music was changing as much as society was changing, because that's crucial to understand the fact that, of course, music, culture in general, it's always an expression of some deep feeling of society. So Western society was falling. Youth Western society was falling into disillusionment, into desperation, and the result is two new type of music in the 70s. On one hand, you have disco, and on the other hand, you have punk. And what's the connection, you will say? Because, I mean, they're extremely different. And on one hand, like, disco was promoting this like glamourization of drugs and promiscuous sex. So it was opening up new frontiers, like on that level, and it was about a new form of dance which was individual. Like, of course, it's still not what we will see later in the 80s and the 90s, where like people are basically dancing by themselves, but already disco planted the seed of individualism. Like, from after 3 decades of communitarianism in politics, like in the university, you know, like the 68 movement, of course, and in music also, in the way we dance, in the way the people were socializing, we are seeing in the 70s the rising of individualism. And so on one hand you have disco, and on the other hand you have punk. And punk, of course, was the nihilistic result of this disillusionment. Like, people that thought that there was nothing mattered anymore. There was no sense in life, and they rejected all the values of the patriarchal society, of the mainstream society. So they created probably the most ideologically strong counterculture of the last century. And both, as you can understand, they're both the result of the same sentiment in a very different way. So while, you know, like, disco was like seeking for a place far away, you know, was seeking for an escapism, a dreamy, in a sort of glittery, dreamy dimension, punk was promoting the exact opposite. So they were saying, okay, we want to burn down the world and peace on its ruins. And so also, like, a very important thing to understand about punk is the fact that they started conceiving the concept of realness, the concept of posing, which was central also in the hip-hop culture later, and probably it came from punk. The fact that it was not only a music, it was a lifestyle. You were a punk not only if you listened to punk music or if you dressed like a punk, but if you were living that lifestyle, enjoying, embracing that culture 100%. Otherwise, you were a poser. You were just dressing up, but you were not part of the movement really. You were just fake. And it's fun if you think about it, because nowadays we cannibalized all the countercultures of the past decades, especially the fashion, like you see, you know, Balenciaga doing a collection about techno or whatever, like Dior doing new wave post-punk. So the thing is, like, we cannibalized this culture and we took only the exterior aspect of it, the surface, and we stripped away the content because it was too difficult, too controversial to be sold. And so we went from a culture of realness to a culture of fakeness, where it's more easy nowadays to become successful if you're fake than if you're real. And now we should start talking about what's fake and what's real, but I don't want to get too complicated. So let's move on to the next track. The previous one, the normal Warm Leatherette, was inspired by a novel by G.J. Ballard, who was like one of the most influential sci-fi writer of the century, by Crash, which is this very controversial book where people are basically reviving sexual. They're having like their sexual exploit only during car accidents. It's a bit difficult to explain, but there's a great movie by David Cronenberg, and we're exactly going to talk about David Cronenberg right now.
A new communications era, brought upon us by satellites, lasers, fiber optics, microprocessors, and magnetic bubbles for the transfer of information, ideas, knowledge.
This is Howard Shore, and that's the soundtrack from Videodrome, a movie from David Cronenberg released in 1983. Why Videodrome? The previous song was supposed to be like the connection point between the punk culture and the industrial culture, because what I missed to say is the fact that disco evolved later into Italo disco and then house music, while punk, like the electronic evolution of punk, can be considered like industrial electro body music, and also like some post-punk contamination with electronic in the 80s. But let's say that like industrial culture was really relevant in the 80s, and probably the most famous industrial movie of all time is Videodrome, which is this very weird body horror by David Cronenberg, and is considered, like, it has been called techno surrealism, so I think it already says a lot about it. It's this movie about Max Ren, who is the owner of this cable TV that is seeking for very extreme visual content for his viewers. He is obsessed by this new culture of exploitation, which became huge from the mid-70s on. Like, cinema was changing its face radically, and it went on looking for like shock movies. Like the censorship has changed. The censorship code of Hollywood was changing during the 70s, in the late 60s, and so there was space for a new genre that was like the exploitation cinema, which was focused on like giving shock to the people. And Max Ren is seeking for this kind of shocking content for his audience, and he digs deep in the underground until he finds this weird channel called Videodrome, which is like showing like sadomasochistic content that looks too real. It's almost like a snuff movie, a movie where like someone dies for real. So let's say that the movie starts this way, and then it's like a descent into the hell of perception, altered perception, and it's like full of conspiracy theories. It's a really interesting, beautiful movie that I really recommend to you. But what I wanted to say here is the fact that Hollywood was changing massively in the 70s, and movies like horror, science fiction that before were like considered like B movies became the main genre during the 80s. And this transition is between like this new form of like colossal, which is like, if you think about it, like E.T. or Star Wars, or like Close Encounters of the Third Kind by Spielberg. You know, all this kind of new cinema arrived because of a transition that we saw in the 70s that was called the New Hollywood. Basically, Hollywood was not capable to connect with this generation we talked before that was really disillusioned about their present, and so they had to change and give like space to this new director to express themselves in a more radical way. So we have this new wave of cinema in the late 60s, early 70s called the New Hollywood, like Easy Rider or like Night of the Living Dead, which was produced completely outside Hollywood, and The Deer Hunter by Michael Cimino. But this season of like debate, of great cinema of ambiguity also, because these movies were really huge from a conceptual level. They were full of ideology, they were really complex, and every time a movie like this, like The Deer Hunter, for example, when a movie like this was released, it was a critic of the American culture, and it sparked big debates. Like, people were really, you know, like, were really vocal about movies back in the days. Like, a movie could have an impact on newspaper as much as a war, you know. Like, when a movie like The Deer Hunter was released, people were like going out and talk about it for weeks. And this is something we don't see anymore, because now we live in a society of pure escapism where like entertainment is mainly focused on not making you think. Like, you just go to the movies because you're tired, or you watch Netflix because you're tired, and you're like, okay, I want to switch my brain off for 1 hour, whatever. Back in the days, it was the opposite. You wanted to watch a movie to think about it. And what's the movie that ended this season of the New Hollywood? It's 1979, Apocalypse Now. love the smell of napalm in the morning. I always dreamt to say this, sorry. But back to us, it was 1979, and Francis Ford Coppola did probably like one of the most disastrous movie from a production perspective. It took him 2 years to film this movie, and everything happened. There was a typhoon that destroyed the set, the protagonist had a heart attack, money was stolen from the set, like, it was really hell, like a Werner Herzog movie, like Fritz Caraldo, very similar. And the Apocalypse Now like takes his story, like its backbone from the very famous novel by Joseph Conrad, The Heart of Darkness, which is about this descent in the heart of Africa, like seeking for this guy who has become, he was like a merchant, he was like working for a merchant, a trading company, and he became sort of like semi-god for the local population. And it's the kind of same concept but translated to the Vietnam War, where like basically Martin Sheen is called by the American army to go through Cambodia and reach Colonel Kurtz, who's like this guy who went completely mad during the war, and he created this sort of like small army of locals, and he is venerated like a god. But like this movie is important because it's of course it's like one of the biggest masterpieces in the history of Hollywood, but at the time when it was released, it was extremely controversial. Like a movie that lots of people didn't like, lots of critics didn't like. It won Cannes Film Festival in a work in progress version, and lots of people were like booing the awards when it was gave to Francis Ford Coppola. It's like it's a very controversial movie, and it marks together with Heaven's Gate by Michael Cimino, it marks the end of an era where Hollywood was giving the total control to movie directors and not to producers. So these were movies where like people were actually taking a risk. They were doing art. They were like pushing it to the next level, and it's very hard to see something like this nowadays. I would say like that as Colonel Kurtz, interpreted by Marlon Brando, so we close the circle. As Colonel Kurtz say at the end of the movie, there's nothing left but the horror. And this is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend. The end of our elaborate plans. The end of everything that stands. The end, no safety or surprise. The end, I'll never stranger's hand in a desperate land. Lost in a romance, wilderness of pain, and all